Welcome to another fabulous edition of Comet Algebra. This video is for Algebra 1, Chapter 7, Section 2, Solving by Substitution. So we learned how to solve system of equations by graphing them. And that works pretty well, except if the numbers get really big, and then it's hard to make a very large graph. So we're going to learn a couple algebraic methods to solve for two equations with two variables. The first method is substitution. So we look at the steps here to solve using substitution. And don't worry if these steps don't make sense to you until we do an example together. Step 1, we actually solve one of the equations for one of the letters, and then we take what we found and we substitute that back into the other equation. And the goal being then we just have one equation with one variable and we know how to solve that. That will give us one of the answers. It'll give us the x or the y. And then we take that answer and we plug it back into one of the originals and we find the other letter. And then of course we need to check our answers. So like I said, don't worry if this doesn't make sense to you right off the bat. Let's do an example, we'll talk about it, and then refer back to these steps and see if they make more sense to you then. All right, example 1 says use substitution to solve the system of equations. So step 1 says to solve for one of the letters. And let me give you some advice. Choose wisely. I'm going to do this poorly first, so don't write this down. Let's say I thought, yeah, all right, I'm going to solve this one for x. So I have my 5x and I add a 4y to both sides and we're looking pretty good. And then I divide everything by 5. And you end up with all these fractions. This is not wrong, it's just unbelievably difficult. So my advice to you is do not choose a letter to solve for that's going to give you a bunch of fractions because your errors are going to go way up. And we want to try to minimize error. So I always like to look for a letter that doesn't have a coefficient other than 1. And I look over this y is going to be the easiest one to solve for because the coefficient is just a -1. So let's take this equation and let's make our plan here of solving for y. So if I first start, I'm going to get rid of the -y, so I'm going to add a y to both sides. So 3x equals 1 plus y, and then I'm going to subtract a 1 from both sides. And so I get 3x minus 1 equals y. All right, that's your first step, is that you have solved for y. Now, I like to take this to visually show you. I'm going to put it in parentheses. This is what y is. Y is 3x minus 1. Now let's go to the other equation, and where we see the y right here, I'm going to try to put just the y in parentheses. Where this y is right here, let's pull that out and let's put this parentheses right there. That's the substitution. Remember, like substitution in sports, you pull out one player, the coach does, and they put in another player? Well, that's what you're doing. You're pulling out this y and you're putting in 3x minus 1. So just keep that 5x just as it is. Keep that minus sign. Keep that 4. But now where this y was, where I put the parentheses, we're going to put the 3x minus 1. And then keep the rest of this. Keep the equal sign and keep the 11. So we kept everything from this first equation except this y. We took the y out and we put in the 3x minus 1. And what we accomplished was a lot. Now we have one equation with one variable and we can solve that using our undoing method. So we start by doing the distribution here. Distributing that -4, we get a -12x plus 4 equals 11, and this should be familiar to you. Combine like terms. I'm going to go ahead and subtract a 4 from both sides. Let's see, 11 minus 4 is 7. And then we divide both sides by a -7. So x is a -1. All that work, and we only have one of the answers, but that's okay. We solved that new equation. So now step 4 says, take this answer and plug it back into one of the original equations to find the y, to find the other letter. So you can use either one of these you like, because remember, this is where they cross. This answer has to work for both of them. And I don't know, I guess the second one looks a little easier to me. You can choose whichever you like. So we take the x and we put it in, or so I should say take the -1 and put it in where the x is. And now we have to solve this for y. So I have -3 minus y is 1. Go ahead and add a 3 to both sides. And -y equals +4. So therefore, if I divide both sides by -1, I get a positive y is a -4. So you can leave your answers like this, or remember, you can always write them in an ordered pair. Either way is fine. Two equations and two variables can be very, very handy in some word problems. In example 2 here, we're asked to write a system of equations and then solve them using substitution. So the first part says the sum of two numbers is 39. Well, the word sum means add. So if you add two numbers, their answer is 39. And then here it says their difference is 11. Well, the word difference means subtract. So if you say x minus y equals 11, and then you're asked to find the two numbers. Well, we're going to use substitution. And this one is really nice because all of these x's and y's just have coefficients of 1. So you can solve for whichever variable you wish. I don't know, I guess I'll just choose this one. I'm going to solve for this x. And the reason I chose that one, because then I knew I would get rid of that old minus sign. So we're just going to add a y to both sides, and we get x equals y plus 11. So remember, we take this and we put it in parentheses because that helps us see it. We take this to the other equation and we put it in where the x is, because x is y plus 11. So instead of this x right here, we're going to put y plus 11. And now we keep writing the rest of this equation, plus y equals 39. Write it just as it is, and don't forget any of the parts. And now we have accomplished the goal of having one equation with one variable that we can solve for. So combine your like terms, subtract an 11 from both sides, and then divide both sides by 2. So we get y is 14. And then you have just one answer. You take that y, go back to either one of these original equations and plug it in to find the x that we need. So if we just said x, I'm just going to use the first one, x plus 14 equals 39. And I subtract a 14 on both sides, I get x equals 25. Again, you can write your answers like that, or you could put it in an ordered pair. But these are the two numbers. All right, now you have the knowledge you need for section 7.2, so have fun with substitution.